The valet almost turned the truck away at the gate. It didn't match the sedans lined up along the circular drive, the low black coues with dealer plates still shining. But when the CEO of a $120 million company walked outside herself to wave that truck through, every head on the porch turned at once. And what she said next, in front of 40 relatives, was the one sentence nobody in that family expected to hear for another 2 years, if ever. Stay with me. What happens at that dinner table by the end of this story is not what you think. If you believe kindness can survive even the coldest room in a house like that one, like this video, and subscribe before we start, because the ending is going to surprise you. 3 weeks earlier, Dean Whitfield almost let the call go to voicemail. Unknown numbers rarely meant good news anymore. Usually a scam about a car warranty he didn't own. He answered anyway, balancing the phone on his shoulder while measuring a door frame in a half-renovated kitchen. "Mr. Whitfield, this is Calla Winthrop's office, calling about the cabinetry proposal you submitted last month." He almost laughed. That proposal had been a long shot, a small furniture shop bidding against firms 10 times its size for a corporate headquarters renovation. He didn't know it yet, but that phone call was about to put him in a room with people who would try, more than once, to make him feel like he didn't belong there. What he also didn't know was that one of those people would end up owing him an apology in front of the entire family before the weekend was over. We'll get there. But first, you need to understand exactly how small his world was before that phone rang. Dean had built Whitfield Woodshop the slow way, the only way he knew how to build anything. Apprenticed under a cabinet maker in his 20s, opened his own shop the year his daughter, Poppy, turned 2. Her mother left 8 months later, not cruelly, just gradually, the way some people drift out of a life instead of walking out of it. Poppy was 7 now, missing her 2 front teeth, convinced that sawdust was a kind of glitter. Every morning ran the same way. Oatmeal with too much cinnamon. A backpack check by the door. 12 hours at the shop, most days, hands moving through motions his own father had taught him. He was good at his work. He had simply never been good at getting anyone with money to notice it. Here's the part that matters. For 9 months, nothing over 4 figures had come through that door. And rent doesn't care how good your joinery is. The Thursday meeting happened on the 40th floor of a glass tower, in a boardroom with a table so long Dean counted the chairs twice. Calla Winthrop walked in 11 minutes late, apologizing once, briskly, the way people apologize when they mean it, but don't have time to dwell on it. She was younger than he expected. 34. The particular stillness of someone who'd learned to hold a room without raising her voice. She'd inherited the company 2 years earlier after her father died at 59, 6 months before the succession plan was even finished. The board had wanted an outside CEO. She'd wanted the company to still feel like her grandfather's when she was done running it. That tension hadn't gone away. It had only gotten quieter. And quiet tension, as you're about to see, is exactly the kind that explodes the loudest when it finally breaks. She slid Dean's own drawings back across the table. "Walk me through this joint," she said, tapping a corner detail. Nobody else who bid on this even mentioned how the drawers would hold up under humidity. 40 minutes turned into 90. She listened without interrupting once, which Dean would learn later was rare for her, and rarer still for the people around her to notice at all. When the meeting ended, she stood and shook his hand a second time. "We'll have paperwork to you by Monday. I want your shop on this project, all of it." Dean drove home with the windows down for the first time in months. He had no idea that phone call and that handshake were about to drag him into a family argument that had nothing to do with cabinetry, and everything to do with who this company actually belonged to. The contract came through exactly as promised. Whitfield Woodshop went from 2 employees to 6 in 8 weeks. Calla visited the shop twice during the build-out. Then a third time alone, with no meeting on the calendar to justify it. Then a fourth, with a thermos of coffee this time and still no meeting. People who run companies worth over $100 million do not usually drive across town to sit on an overturned crate near a finishing bench. So why did she keep coming back? That question is exactly what her own mother would ask her 3 weeks later in a voice sharp enough to cut through polished china. But before we get to that dinner table, you need to meet the person who changed everything without saying a single word about it. Poppy met Calla on the fifth visit, wandering out from the back office where she did homework after school. She looked Calla over with the frank assessment only a 7-year-old manages without embarrassment. "Are you the lady who bought all our stuff?" "I'm the lady who hired your dad," Calla said, crouching to her height. "Which is different. Is it good stuff or bad stuff you hired him for?" "The best kind. Furniture that lasts." Poppy held out a scrap of wood she'd been sanding, smooth on one side, rough on the other. "You can have this. It's a sample." Calla took it like it was something valuable, because in that moment it was. Dean watched from the doorway and felt something in his chest loosen that he hadn't let himself feel in years. He thought that was the whole story. A quiet, ordinary afternoon. He had no idea it would come up again, word for word, in front of a boardroom full of relatives who wanted to use it against him. Ruth mentioned offhand that the Winthrop family reunion happened every autumn at the lake house, and that this year marked the first one since Calla's father passed. Dean didn't think much of it until the following Friday, when Calla showed up at the shop looking like someone bracing for weather. "I have a favor to ask," she said. "And you're allowed to say no. Here's where most people would expect a simple invitation." It wasn't simple, not even close. "My family reunion is in 10 days. My mother has spent 2 years trying to set me up with the son of one of our biggest suppliers, because apparently a merger through marriage still counts as strategy to her." She paused. "I don't want to bring a stranger and pretend. I thought of you before anyone else, and I want to be honest. I don't entirely know what that means yet." Dean turned the offer over slowly, the way he turned over a plank before deciding what to make of it. "Poppy comes too," he said. "That's not negotiable." "I was hoping you'd say that." What neither of them knew yet was that this single decision, bringing a carpenter and his daughter to a family reunion, was about to threaten a board vote worth 9 figures. Stick around, because the next scene is where everything starts to unravel. The drive upstate took just over 3 hours, Poppy narrating from the back seat about a lighthouse book she'd already finished twice. Dean borrowed a jacket that didn't quite fit and packed a small bag of tools out of habit, the way some men pack a first aid kit on a trip where nobody expects to get hurt. The Winthrop Lake House was not a house so much as an estate wearing a house's name, white clapboard, a dock stretching into water so still it looked painted on. Calla met them at the gate before the valet could wave them through. When Dean stepped down from the truck, she took his hand without hesitation and said, loud enough for the whole porch to hear, "I'm so glad you could make it." 40 relatives went quiet at once, and that single sentence, said with zero explanation attached to it, was about to be misread in a way that neither of them saw coming. A mistake that would take an entire weekend and one very uncomfortable breakfast to undo. Calla's mother, Eleanor, crossed the lawn with a smile that arrived half a second before her eyes caught up to it. "Calla, darling, you didn't tell us you were bringing someone." "I'm bringing Dean." "And his daughter, Poppy." Eleanor's eyes moved over the borrowed jacket, the work boots scrubbed clean, but unmistakably work boots. "Well, welcome to the family, in whatever capacity that means." Dean caught the phrasing. He didn't correct it, neither did Calla. "That's mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 is about to be a lot louder, and it comes from a man holding a cocktail near the boathouse who thinks he's the first person to notice something obvious." It was Calla's cousin Wesley who said the word out loud an hour later. "So you're the groom," he said, grinning like he'd cracked a code. Calla kept this quiet. Good for her. Dean opened his mouth to correct him. Poppy, sitting cross-legged nearby building a tower out of dock rope, answered first without even looking up. "He's not the groom. He builds furniture." Wesley laughed it off, as a child being literal, and moved on to refill his drink. By dinner, 3 separate relatives had used the word groom in Dean's hearing. Each time, someone changed the subject before he could finish correcting it. And here's the part that should worry you. Calla noticed every single time, and every single time, she let it slide. Why would a woman this sharp, this careful, let a lie sit at her own family's dinner table for an entire evening? The answer is not what you'd expect, and it comes out of her own mouth over the soup course. "I should have said something the second Wesley opened his mouth," she told Dean quietly. "I didn't, and I don't have a good reason why." "Why didn't you?" She was quiet long enough that Dean thought she might not answer at all. Because for one evening, nobody was asking me if I was steady enough to run this company alone. They were just glad I brought someone home. I let myself have that longer than I should have. Dean didn't correct the assumption that night either. But the next morning, that small, harmless silence was about to collide with something much bigger. A board vote. $120 million company, and an uncle who had been waiting 2 years for exactly this kind of opening. Eleanor cornered Calla near the kitchen after the plates were cleared. "He seems like a decent man," Eleanor said, "but you understand what people will say. A woman running this company, engaged to a carpenter with a daughter and a truck older than some of our furniture line. He builds the furniture in our furniture line, Mother. That's not the point, and you know it." Calla walked away before her mother could answer. That conversation should have stayed private. It didn't. And by the next morning it had already found its way to exactly the person who could do the most damage with it. Wesley, eager to be the one who broke the news first, mentioned the engagement to a board member's wife, who happened to sit on the Investor Relations Committee. By brunch, the story had traveled far enough that Calla's uncle Marcus, who had never once hidden his opinion that Calla was too young and too soft for the chair she'd inherited, brought it up directly at the table, in front of everyone. "So this is the man," Marcus said, gesturing with his coffee cup. "The one replacing the Hargrove boy your mother had lined up." "There was no lining up," Calla said evenly. "There was a merger dressed up as a marriage." "Careful," Marcus said, still smiling, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "Half this table has money riding on this company staying steady. The surprise fiancé nobody vetted makes people nervous. Board renewal is in 6 weeks. This isn't the year for surprises." Poppy looked up from her pancakes. "Why is everyone talking about my dad like he's a problem?" Nobody answered her right away. And that silence, that exact uncomfortable silence, was the moment Dean finally decided he was done letting anyone else control the story. He set his napkin down. "I think it's time I said something true," he said, and the whole table turned toward him. "I'm not Calla's fiancé. I never have been. I run a small furniture shop that Calla hired on merit, and somewhere over the last 2 days a joke turned into an assumption, and none of us corrected it fast enough. That's on me as much as anyone." Marcus set his coffee down slowly. "Then what exactly is this weekend?" "It's a friend asking another friend for backup at a family event where she didn't want to walk in alone. That's all it ever was. If that's a problem for the board has smaller problems than a woodworker showing up to breakfast." Now here's where you'd expect the whole table to relax. It didn't, because Calla was about to say something that changed the entire direction of the conversation. "He's right," Calla said, looking around the table. "There's no engagement. There's a man I respect, running a business that saved 12 jobs at our headquarters renovation and delivered under budget, which is more than I can say for half the vendors this family has ever approved without blinking, if that unsettles anyone here more than actual mismanagement does. I think that says more about this table than it does about him." The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the sound of a room quietly recalculating everything it thought it knew, and the person who spoke next was the one voice in that family nobody in the room was prepared to argue with. Calla's grandmother, Vivian, 80 years old that very weekend, set down her teacup with a soft, deliberate click. "I built the original workshop division of this company in a garage with your grandfather," she said, looking straight at Marcus. "Nobody vetted us either. We just built things people needed. And this family somehow forgot that's what actually built the fortune everyone's so afraid of losing now." She turned to Dean. "Young man, I'd like to see this credenza everyone keeps whispering about." "It's in the truck," Dean said. "I brought samples. Have it, I suppose. Then let's see them before this family embarrasses itself further over breakfast." What happened on that porch over the next hour is the moment that actually decided how this whole story ends. Stay with me. The samples came out onto the porch table an hour later. Joinery details and finished swatches spread across white linen that had never held sawdust before. Vivian ran her fingers along the seams the same unhurried way Calla had the first day in the boardroom. "Your grandfather would have liked this man," she said, quiet enough that only Calla and Dean heard it. "Not because of the furniture, because he didn't flinch once during that whole conversation. Neither did you. Marcus didn't apologize outright. But he asked two genuine questions about the shop's capacity. The kind of questions people ask when they've quietly decided to stop performing skepticism. By the time the weekend ended, he mentioned, almost offhand, that the company's regional offices could use custom fixtures too. That single sentence was about to turn into a second contract worth more than the first one. Eleanor found Calla alone by the dock that evening. The lake gone the color of pewter under a sky thinking about rain. "I owe you an apology," Eleanor said, "not for asking questions. For asking them like the answer I wanted was more important than the one that was true." "Why does it matter so much to you what people think?" "Because I spent 30 years making sure nobody in a boardroom could dismiss this family," Eleanor said. "I forgot somewhere along the way that dismissing people ourselves was never supposed to be the price of that." Calla watched Poppy skip flat stones across water too still to really carry them, each one sinking after a single hop. "He never asked me to defend him back there," she said. "He just told the truth and let the room do what it wanted with it. That's the first time in 2 years I've watched someone handle this family without trying to manage it." Eleanor followed her gaze toward Dean, crouched at the water's edge, showing Poppy how to angle a stone flat against her palm. "Maybe that's worth paying attention to," Eleanor said, "even if it isn't a merger." Now, you might think that's where the story ends. It isn't. Because 6 weeks later, something happened at the board renewal vote that neither Dean nor Calla saw coming, and it changed the entire shape of what came after that lake house weekend. The board renewal passed 14 votes in favor. One abstention from Marcus, who'd apparently decided neutral was the safest place to stand after everything that surfaced that weekend. Whitfield Woodshop signed a second contract before the ink on the first had even dried. This one for the regional offices Marcus had mentioned almost as an afterthought by the lake. Dean hired 2 more people, including a 19-year-old apprentice who reminded Ruth so much of a younger Dean that she said so out loud more than once. Poppy started visiting the Winthrop offices some Fridays after school, curled up in the corner of Calla's office with a sketch pad instead of homework, drawing furniture that didn't exist yet. Calla kept one of the drawings pinned above her desk, not behind it, where visitors could see it. "It reminds me what this company was actually supposed to be for," she always said. Dean and Calla never announced anything, because there was never a single moment either of them could point to and call the beginning. It accumulated instead. One Friday delivery that turned into dinner. One dinner that turned into another. One weekend at the lake house the following autumn where nobody assumed anything, because Calla simply said it plainly at the door. "This is Dean. We're together, and I'd like everyone to actually mean it when they welcome him this time." Eleanor was the first to shake his hand. Marcus was the second. So here's the loop we open at the very beginning of this video. Finally closed. That first sentence, "I'm so glad you could make it," wasn't a lie dressed up as a joke, and it wasn't an engagement either. It was a woman finally choosing honesty over performance, even when honesty cost her an uncomfortable breakfast in front of the whole family. And it turned out to be worth more than any merger her mother ever tried to arrange. If this story reminded you that the truth is usually simpler and braver than the version people are afraid to say out loud, tell us in the comments. And if you believe kindness still finds its way through even the noisiest rooms, share this with someone who needs that reminder today. Sometimes the biggest lie in a room isn't the one somebody tells on purpose. It's the one everybody quietly agrees not to correct, because correcting it would cost something nobody wants to pay in that moment. Dean Whitfield never set out to be mistaken for anything he wasn't. He simply showed up, told the truth when the truth finally mattered more than the silence, and let people decide for themselves what to do with it. That, more than any boardroom vote or lake house dinner, turned out to be the thing worth building a life around. Not a performance, not a strategy. Just a man willing to say what was true in front of people who'd forgotten how simple that could be.